They laughed when I said I was broke and banned me from Thanksgiving dinner. They say blood is thicker than water. In my family, it was thicker than motor oil and cost about 3 times as much per quart. Funny how that works out. My name's Tom Callahan, and for the better part of 15 years, I've been steering 18-wheelers across this beautiful, unforgiving country of ours. Coast to coast, border to border. You name the interstate, I've probably left tire marks on it. But this story isn't about the miles I've logged or the sunrises I've watched through a bug-splattered windshield. It's about the day I discovered that sometimes the heaviest load you carry isn't the one attached to your rig. I used to think my job wasn't just moving freight from point A to point B. Nope. In my mind, I was delivering happiness straight to my family's doorstep, one paycheck at a time. Every direct deposit was another brick in the wall of their comfort, their security, their American dream that somehow I was financing from the cab of a Peterbilt. Picture this. 4th of July, 3 years back. Dad standing in the driveway, running his hands over a brand-new John Deere riding mower, like it's a vintage Corvette. The price tag would have made most folks choke on their beer, but not me. I just smiled, watching him circle that machine, already planning his assault on the neighborhood lawn competition. He never asked where the money came from. Never wondered why his retirement account suddenly had a mysterious deposit that matched the mower's price tag down to the penny. Or take my sister Jessica's wedding. Beautiful ceremony, really was. While everyone was dancing to that overplayed Bruno Mars song, I slipped the venue coordinator my credit card. Open bar for 200 guests doesn't come cheap, but seeing Jessica cry those happy tears? Man, I told myself it was worth every cent. Even when the bill came in at $8,000 and change. Even when I had to take 3 extra runs that month just to cover it. Mom's kitchen looked like something out of those cooking shows she loved to watch. Viking Rain Sub-Zero fridge, that fancy espresso machine that cost more than some people's monthly rent. She mentioned wanting to upgrade exactly once, during Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. By Christmas, her kitchen was fully renovated. She acted surprised, but we both knew the renovation fairy wasn't real. The renovation fairy was just her son, pulling doubles and triples, mainlining coffee and energy drinks to stay awake on I-80 through Nebraska at 3 in the morning. They loved making jokes about it. Oh boy, did they love their jokes. You know how every family has that one running gag that stopped being funny years ago, but nobody has the heart to kill it? Ours was about me being their personal ATM. Last Thanksgiving, we're all sitting around the table, and my brother-in-law Kevin raises his craft beer, some limited edition nonsense that probably costs $20 a bottle, and goes, "Here's to Tom, the only bank that never charges overdraft fees." Everyone laughed. Mom giggled into her napkin. Dad slapped the table. Jessica clinked her wine glass against Kevin's bottle. I laughed too. Had to. That's what you do when you're the punchline. But inside, something was starting to crack. Like when you notice that first tiny chip in your windshield, and you know it's only a matter of time before the whole thing spiders out. The thing about family jokes is they're never really jokes. They're truths dressed up in laugh tracks. Kevin wasn't wrong. I never did charge overdraft fees. Never said no. Never asked for collateral. The Bank of Tom was always open, 24/7, 365. 2 months after that dinner, Mom called while I was somewhere outside Tulsa. Not to ask how I was doing. Not to see if I was eating right or getting enough sleep. She called to ask my opinion about something. That's how she always started. Never a direct request. Always wanted my opinion first. "Tommy," she said, using that voice mother's perfect over decades of practice. "The Hendersons just got their roof redone. Architectural shingles, very classy. Makes our roof look a bit tired. You know how your father is about keeping up appearances." She wasn't asking. She was painting a picture, and my job was to figure out how to pay for the paint. $22,000 later, my parents had the nicest roof in the subdivision. I had 6 months of ramen noodles and truck stop coffee to look forward to. But here's the thing about being needed. It's addictive. More addictive than anything they warn you about at those mandatory DOT safety meetings. Every time I wrote a check, wired money, or mysteriously handled another family crisis, I got this hit, this rush. I was necessary. I was the hero. I was the one who kept the wheels turning, literally and figuratively. The second week of last month changed everything. I'd been on the road for 9 straight days, hauling electronics from Portland to Phoenix. Somewhere on the California-Arizona border, at a truck stop in Blythe that looked like every other truck stop in America, I stopped for fuel and coffee. Arizona coffee, to be specific, cheaper by 50 cents. After 2,000 miles, my body felt like it had been put through a cement mixer. My checking account wasn't looking much better. $5 and some change left after fuel, food, and the usual automatic transfers to what I'd started calling the family fund. $5 that normally would have gone straight into the jar marked Jessica's kitchen remodel or Dad's new fishing boat or whatever project was next on the list. But that night, something in me just snapped, not in a violent way. More like when a rubber band that's been stretched too long finally gives up. I walked across the state line into California, literally 10 feet from where I bought my coffee, and there was this gas station convenience store. Bright lights, probably hadn't been cleaned since the 90s, with one of those spinning hot dog machines that nobody in their right mind would eat from. They had a display of scratch-off lottery tickets. Golden Dreams, $5 Fortune, Lucky Lightning. Stupid names for stupid games that prey on desperate people. I stood there for a solid minute, those $5 burning a hole in my pocket. $5. The first $5 in probably 10 years that I was thinking about spending on something absolutely, completely, utterly useless. Except it wasn't useless. It was hope. Microscopic, idiotic, statistically impossible hope, but hope nonetheless. For me, just for me. I bought a Golden Dreams ticket and scratched it off right there in the parking lot, using a penny I found on the ground. Heads up, lucky penny, right? First number, match. Second number, match. Third number. My hands started shaking, not from exhaustion this time. $5.5 million. The grand prize. The big kahuna. The kind of money that changes everything or ruins everything, depending on how you play it. First emotion wasn't joy, wasn't relief. It was pure, crystallized panic. What the hell was I supposed to do with $5.5 million? After taxes, after taking the lump sum instead of the annuity. Because let's be real, I know how money works. I'd be looking at around $3.2 million. Still more money than I'd see in 5 lifetimes of hauling freight. I sat in my cab for an hour, just staring at that ticket, like it might disappear if I looked away. Then I did the only thing that made sense. I called Mike Torres, 63 years old, been driving since before I was born. The kind of guy who'd seen everything twice and forgotten more than most people ever learn. If anyone would know what to do, it'd be Mike. He listened to me ramble for 10 minutes straight, didn't interrupt once. When I finally ran out of words, he let the silence stretch out like a long, empty highway. Then he said something I'll never forget. His voice had that raspy quality you get from too many cigarettes and too much diesel exhaust, but his words were clear as a bell. He told me that some roads are dead ends, and you can drive them your whole life, burning fuel and wearing down your tires, but all you'll find at the end is a stop sign. No outlet, no alternate route, just a place to turn around and admit you've been going nowhere. He said before I showed anyone my treasure map, I better make sure they saw me as the captain of the ship, not just a chest full of gold coins. Mike's words hit me like a cold shower in the middle of the Mojave. They scraped against something I'd been trying not to think about for years. The possibility, no, the probability that my family didn't love me. They loved what I provided. There's a difference, and it's about as wide as the Grand Canyon. I desperately wanted to prove him wrong. Needed to prove him wrong. Because if Mike was right, then what the hell had I been doing for the last 15 years? What was all that sacrifice for? That's when the plan started forming. Not a mean plan. Not a vengeful plan. Just a test. Like those stress tests they do on bridges to see how much weight they can really hold before the metal starts to buckle. I practiced a call 3 times before I dialed. Had to get the voice right. Had to sound shocked, desperate, but not theatrical. Nobody believes theatrical. They believe tired. They believe defeated. After 15 years on the road, I knew how to sound both. Mom picked up on the third ring. Her voice had that distracted quality it always had when I called, like I was interrupting something more important. Maybe I always was. I told her there'd been an accident. Not my fault. But that never matters in the corporate world. A car had cut me off, slammed their brakes. I'd swerved to avoid turning them into highway paste. The load shifted. Electronics. Expensive ones. The company's insurance was fighting it, claiming negligence. They'd frozen my accounts pending investigation. Legal stuff. Complicated stuff. The kind of stuff that destroys working people every single day in America. I told her I'd lost everything. The silence on her end lasted maybe 3 seconds. Felt like 3 hours. Then she made this sound. Not quite a gasp, not quite a sigh. Something in between. The sound of inconvenience arriving uninvited. She said we'd figure something out. Said family sticks together. Said all the right words in all the right places. But her voice had already changed frequencies, tuned to a different station, the one that plays static instead of music. I hung up after promising to call back with more details. Sat there in my truck cab, still holding that $5 million ticket, feeling like the richest and poorest man in America simultaneously. The test was in motion. The stress test had begun. I wasn't trying to hurt them. That's what I need you to understand. I wasn't some bitter son looking for revenge. I was just a tired man who needed to know if he'd been building a home or just paying rent on a relationship that was month to month at best. I was afraid, not of losing the money. Hell, I'd never had it to begin with. Not of losing my job. That was just a story anyway. I was afraid of losing myself again, of disappearing into their needs, their wants, their dreams, while mine sat in the back of the cab, collecting dust with old log books and forgotten coffee cups. As I put the phone down, I realized I just lit a fuse. How long it was, where it led, what it was connected to, I had no idea. But in a few days, maybe a week, I'd have my answer. I'd know if Mike was wrong about those dead-end roads. Part of me hoped he was. Most of me knew he wasn't. Mike was right. God help me. That old trucker was right about everything. It took exactly 43 hours for my family to show their true colors. 43 hours. Less time than it takes to drive from Seattle to Miami if you really push it. That's all it took for 15 years of sacrifice to reveal itself as a one-way street in a bad neighborhood. The first call came from Kevin, my brother-in-law, the financial advisor who drove a leased BMW and talked about market volatility like he understood it. Tuesday morning, 7:30 sharp. He probably figured he'd catch me between deliveries, maybe soften me up while I was tired. His voice started smooth, concerned, asked how I was holding up, said he'd heard about my situation from Jessica. Then came the pause. You know that pause, the one that sits between sympathy and the real reason someone called. It's like that moment when a state trooper walks up to your window and you're waiting to hear how fast they clocked you going. I told him straight. Said I needed $500 to cover food and a motel until the legal mess got sorted. 500, not 5,000, not 50,000, $500. The same amount I'd spent on his birthday dinner last year without blinking. The transformation was instant, like flipping a switch from FM radio to AM static. All that brotherly concern evaporated faster than morning dew in Phoenix. He cleared his throat, that nervous little sound people make when they're about to disappoint you but want to feel good about it. He launched into this speech about financial responsibility, market downturns, portfolio management. Said he and Jessica were implementing a new investment strategy that required liquid capital. Used the phrase fiduciary duty at least 3 times. Then he hit me with a knockout punch. Told me that lending money during my crisis would be enabling destructive patterns. That sometimes the best help is no help at all. This was the same guy who'd borrowed $8,000 from me 3 years ago for his can't-miss cryptocurrency investment. Spoiler alert, it missed. Never saw a penny of that money again, but I never asked. Family doesn't keep score, right? Wrong. They keep score. They just only count their own points. He actually had the stones to end the call by saying he was doing this for my own good, teaching me to stand on my own 2 feet, like I hadn't been standing on them for 16 hours a day, every day, for the past decade and a half. The irony was thick enough to spread on toast. Wednesday afternoon, I drove to Jessica's house. Figured maybe face-to-face would be different. Maybe as she saw her big brother in person, remembered all those times I'd been there for her. Something would click. Hope is a dangerous drug, and I was still using. Their house sat in one of those suburban developments where every third house is the same model, just with different colored shutters. The lawn was perfect, the kind of perfect that cost $200 a month in landscaping fees. Fees I'd helped cover when Kevin's cryptocurrency adventure went south. Jessica came out before I even made it to the front door. Stopped me on the driveway like I was selling magazines or spreading the word about some religion she wasn't interested in. She was wearing workout clothes that probably cost more than most people's entire wardrobe. Lululemon, or whatever overpriced brand was trending that week. The smell hit me first. Coffee and expensive perfume, the kind that comes in bottles shaped like abstract art. Me, I brought the cologne of diesel fuel and 3 days of truck stop showers. She kept her distance, arms crossed, like poverty might be contagious. She didn't invite me in, didn't even pretend to consider it. Her kids were inside, my nephew and niece, probably doing homework at the kitchen table I'd helped by. But Aunt Jessica had suddenly developed very strict boundaries about house guests. Her voice had this quality to it, rehearsed, like she'd practiced this conversation in the mirror. She told me it wasn't a good time. Kids had soccer practice, then piano, then her yoga class. The schedule was packed. Always would be, apparently. Kevin thought it best that they maintained some distance while I worked through my issues. For my own good, of course. Everything was for my own good these days. I stood there on her driveway, on the concrete I'd helped pour when they first moved in, and listened to my little sister explain why I couldn't crash on her couch for a few nights. The sister whose wedding I'd paid for, whose house I'd helped finance, whose life I'd subsidized for years. She actually used the word boundaries, said them keeping their distance would help me develop self-sufficiency. This from a woman who'd call me crying at 2 a.m. when their water heater broke, and I'd driven 4 hours out of my way to fix it and buy them a new one. The worst part? She looked relieved when I turned to leave, like she'd successfully navigated a dangerous situation. Her brother, the dangerous situation. The ATM had turned into a liability, and liabilities get written off. Thursday was when I hit rock bottom, or what I thought was rock bottom. Turns out, when you're family, there's always a sub-basement. I drove to my parents' house, the house I grew up in. Still had the same mailbox I'd helped Dad install in high school. Same oak tree in the front yard, just bigger now. The roof, though, that was new. $22,000 new. Mom answered the door, but didn't open it all the way. Just enough to see me, not enough to let me in. Like I was a stranger selling something she didn't want. Behind her, I could hear the TV, some game show where people won money for answering easy questions. The irony wasn't lost on me. I asked if I could stay in my old room, just for a few days, a week at most, until I got back on my feet. It was still there, that room. They use it for storage now, but the bed was still there. My high school trophies still on the shelf. My whole childhood, basically, boxed up and waiting. Dad appeared behind Mom. His face had that look, you know the one, the face of a man about to do something he's convinced himself is necessary, but knows is wrong. He put his hand on Mom's shoulder, a united front against their wayward son. He told me they loved me. Started with that, which is how you know something bad is coming. Like when a doctor says, "Now, I don't want you to worry, but..." He said they loved me, but they were too old for drama, too old for stress. My problems were too heavy for them to carry. I'd always been strong, he said, a fighter. I'd figured out. I always did. Then he said something that cut deeper than all Kevin's financial lectures and Jessica's boundaries combined. He said I should have been more careful, should have saved more, should have prepared for emergencies instead of always bailing everyone else out, like my generosity had been a character flaw all along. The door closed with this soft click. Not a slam. That would have been too dramatic. Just a quiet click, like punctuation at the end of a sentence. The sentence that said I was no longer welcome in a house I'd helped save from foreclosure twice. I sat in my truck in their driveway for 20 minutes, watching the house I grew up in. The house where Mom taught me to tie my shoes. Where Dad showed me how to throw a curveball. Where Jessica and I built blanket forts and promised we'd always protect each other. Now it was just another building full of strangers who happened to share my DNA. 3 strikes. I was out. No home to run to. That's when I found myself at the Bluebird Diner off Route 66. One of those places that hasn't changed since the 70s and doesn't plan to. Red vinyl booths held together with duct tape. Coffee that could strip paint. The kind of place where nobody asks questions because everyone's running from something. I must have looked like death warmed over, because the waitress, Sarah, according to her name tag, took one look at me and her whole expression changed. Not pity. Something else. Recognition, maybe. She brought coffee without me ordering it, then came back with a slice of apple pie I definitely hadn't asked for. When I started to protest, she held up her hand, told me it was on the house, said I looked like someone who just tried to drive through Donner Pass in winter on summer tires. Then she said something that stopped me cold. Said she knew that look, that 1,000-yard stare truckers get when the road stops making sense. Her dad drove for 30 years, she said. Recognized the look from a mile away. Sometimes, she said, a cup of coffee is all that stands between a driver and doing something stupid. Something permanent. She didn't hover. Didn't try to make conversation. Just kept my coffee full and left me alone with my thoughts. But that simple kindness from a stranger, it meant everything. This woman who didn't know me from Adam showed me more genuine concern in 5 minutes than my family had shown in 43 hours. The pie was good, homemade, with that lattice crust that takes actual effort. Sarah came back when I was finishing it, refilled my coffee one more time, mentioned her dad used to say the hardest loads to carry were the ones nobody else could see. The invisible weight that builds up mile after mile until your suspension can't take any more. I sat in that diner until closing time, nursing coffee and thinking about invisible weight, about Mike's warning, about dead-end roads and stop signs, about the difference between being needed and being loved. Friday morning, I made one last call. Mom picked up on the second ring, sounding cheerful. Her book club was coming over later. They were doing appetizers. Festive, she said. Very festive. I asked about Thanksgiving. It was 3 weeks away. Surely things would be sorted by then. Surely they'd want me at the table, even if my life was a mess. Family traditions and all that. The pause lasted maybe 5 seconds. Felt like 5 years. Then she laughed, this nervous, fluttery laugh like a bird hitting a window. She suggested maybe I should skip it this year. Wouldn't want to bring down the mood. Everyone was looking forward to a drama-free holiday, but they'd save me some leftovers. Maybe send a plate if I had an address by then. The call ended with her saying they'd be thinking of me. Thoughts and prayers. The participation trophy of family support. I sat in my truck holding that dead phone, finally understanding something that had been staring me in the face for years. The door to what I call home hadn't just closed. It had been locked for years. I'd just been too busy paying for the locks to notice they'd changed them. The funny thing about falling is that eventually you hit bottom. And when you do, when you're lying there in the wreckage of what you thought your life was, you've got 2 choices. Stay down or stand up different. That lottery ticket in my wallet felt heavier than ever. 5.5 million reasons to stand up different. But first, I had some thinking to do. Some planning. Because if my family had taught me anything in those 43 hours, it was this. Love might be unconditional, but everything else has a price tag. And I was about to show them the bill. 3 weeks. That's all it took to rebuild myself from the ground up. 3 weeks of phone calls to lawyers who charge more per hour than I made in a day. 3 weeks of financial advisors explaining tax implications and trust structures. 3 weeks of cold, calculated planning. The motel room had given way to a rented office space in a strip mall outside Bakersfield. Nothing fancy, just four walls, a desk, and the most important purchase I'd ever made, a really good coffee maker. Because if you're going to architect your family's reckoning, you need quality caffeine. There's a saying about revenge being a dish best served cold. That's amateur hour. Revenge is pointless. What I was after was something else entirely. Justice? Maybe. Truth? Definitely. But mostly, I wanted to stop being the ghost who haunted his own life. The first lawyer I met looked like he'd stepped out of a law firm commercial. Perfect suit, perfect teeth, perfect disappointment when he saw me walking wearing flannel and work boots. His expression changed real quick when I showed him the lottery ticket and the bank statement showing the wire transfer. Money has this funny way of making people suddenly colorblind to blue collars. We sat in his office, all mahogany and leather, the kind of place that smells like success and bankruptcy, depending on which side of the desk you're sitting on. He explained my options like he was teaching a kindergartner about shapes. Lump sum versus annuity, federal taxes, state taxes, the whole alphabet soup of government hands reaching for their piece. After all was said and done, after Uncle Sam and Governor California took their cuts, I'd walk away with about $3.2 million. Still more money than generations of Callahans had ever seen in one place. The lawyer suggested a revocable trust. Smart money moves, he called it. Asset protection. Estate planning. Words that felt foreign in my mouth, like speaking a language I'd only heard but never practiced. I told him to set it up. Callahan Holdings, LLC. Had a nice ring to it. Like I was suddenly somebody who had holdings instead of just bills and regrets. The financial advisor was next. Different building, same smell of money. This one was younger, hungrier, talked about portfolios and diversification and compound interest like they were religious concepts, which, in a way, I guess they were. The religion of wealth, the church of having enough. But I wasn't there for sermon. I had a very specific prayer in mind. I asked him about buying debt. He looked at me funny, like I'd asked about buying air or sunshine. Then I explained what I wanted, and his face went through this beautiful transformation. Surprise, understanding, then something that looked almost like respect. Turns out, buying someone's mortgage debt is perfectly legal. Happens all the time. Banks sell loans to other banks. Investment firms buy bundles of mortgages like they're trading cards. All you need is money and the right paperwork. I had both. That's when things got interesting. Really interesting. I hired a private investigator through the law firm. Completely legal, they assured me. Public records are public for a reason. Within a week, I had a file thicker than a truck stop hamburger. Every lien, every late payment, every court filing, the truth laid out in black and white, with official seals and case numbers. My parents were drowning, had been for years. The house was mortgaged to the hilt, second mortgage, home equity line of credit, the works. Kevin's failed investments weren't just crypto. There were 3 failed business ventures, 2 lawsuits, and a gambling problem that explained why Jessica always handled their finances. The pieces clicked together like a transmission, finally finding the right gear. They hadn't rejected me because I was broke. They rejected me because broke was contagious, and they were already infected. My supposed poverty threatened to expose their actual poverty. Their cruelty had been preemptive self-defense. The investigator found more. Dad had been lying about being retired. He'd been laid off 18 months ago. Age discrimination lawsuit went nowhere. Mom's book club was actually a part-time job at a library she was too proud to admit she needed. They were one missed payment away from foreclosure. Kevin and Jessica weren't much better. That perfect suburban house, 60 days behind on the mortgage. The BMW, 3 months from repossession. Their investment portfolio consisted mainly of debt and delusion. I sat with this information for 2 days. Just sat with it. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated. Another part wanted to feel angry. But mostly I just felt tired. Bone deep, soul level tired. Like I'd been carrying their secrets along with their bills. And only now realized how heavy secrets could be. That's when I made the decision. Not for revenge. Not even for justice. but for clarity. For the first time in my life, I was going to set the terms of our relationship, draw the map, instead of just driving the route someone else planned. The lawyer drew up the papers. My company, Callahan Holdings, LLC, would purchase the mortgage on my parents' house from their current lender. The bank was thrilled. One less problem loan off their books. The purchase price was exactly what was owed, plus the back payments, plus the accumulated interest and fees. All told, about $430,000. The beauty of it was its simplicity. No tricks, no loopholes, no legality. Just business. The same kind of business that happened every day in America. The only difference was that this time I was the one holding the paper. The lawyer asked what I wanted to do next. Foreclose? Demand immediate payment? Renegotiate terms? I told him none of the above. I wanted a meeting, a business meeting. December 24th, 10 a.m., his conference room. He asked why Christmas Eve. I told him they'd uninvited me from Thanksgiving. Seemed only fair I return the favor with interest. Compound interest, to be exact. The official letters went out December 10th. Certified mail, signature required. Very formal, very legal. The kind of letter that makes your hands shake when you open it. I know because I'd opened enough of them over the years. Usually bills I'd end up paying for someone else. The letter informed them that their mortgage had been purchased by Callahan Holdings, LLC, that the terms remained unchanged, but that the company was requesting a meeting to discuss potential restructuring options. It was signed by the lawyer, not me. My name appeared nowhere except in the company name, which they probably wouldn't even notice. I knew they'd come. They had to. When you owe money and the creditor calls a meeting, you show up. You put on your best clothes, practice your explanations, and hope for mercy. I'd been on their side of that table before. Now it was time to see how the view looked from the other side. December 24th came fast and slow at the same time, like waiting for test results or a judge's verdict. Time moves different when you're waiting for a reckoning. I got to the lawyer's office early. Traded my flannel for a suit I'd bought off the rack and had tailored. Nothing flashy, but it fit right. Made me look like someone who owned things instead of someone who owed things. Amazing what the right clothes can do for your spine. Sarah was with me. We'd been talking since that night at the diner. Turns out, she understood more than just a trucker's life. She understood family disappointment, understood the weight of other people's expectations. Her dad had died on the road, jackknifed in a snowstorm trying to make one last delivery to pay for her college. She'd spent years feeling guilty about that education, that sacrifice. We understood each other in ways that didn't need words. My family arrived 15 minutes early, punctuality born from fear. I watched them through the conference room glass, sitting in the waiting area. They looked smaller than I remembered. Older. Mom kept checking her phone. Dad was reading the same magazine page over and over. Jessica and Kevin sat apart, the distance between them saying more than words could. The lawyer brought them in first. I waited in another room, watching them get settled, watching them wonder who they were meeting. The lawyer started his presentation. Dry, factual, devastating. Their debt had been purchased. The new owner was willing to discuss terms. All very standard, he assured them. Then I walked in. The silence was perfect, absolute, like the world had stopped to hold its breath. Mom's hand went to her throat. Dad's face went through 3 shades of pale. Kevin actually stood up like he might run. Jessica just stared, her mouth forming words that wouldn't come. I sat down across from them, Sarah beside me. The lawyer at the head of the table like a referee at the world's most awkward boxing match. I'd practiced what I'd say, rehearsed 100 times in my head. But when the moment came, the prepared speech felt wrong. Too clean, too Hollywood. This was messier than that. This was real life, and real life doesn't come with scriptwriters. So I just started talking, told them about the lottery ticket, about Mike's advice, about the test I'd run and why. Laid it all out like I was describing a route from one coast to another. Here's where we started. Here's where we went wrong. Here's where we are now. I told them I never minded the money. Money was just paper and numbers, meaningless until you gave it meaning. What I minded was being erased, being reduced to a function instead of a person. They'd turn me into an ATM, and when the ATM broke, they threw away instead of trying to fix it. Dad tried to speak. Started to say something about tough love, about teaching responsibility. I stopped him with a raised hand. Told him I'd learned more about responsibility in 3 weeks of his absence than in 36 years of his presence. That shut him up quick. Mom was crying. Quiet tears. The kind that come when you realize the picture you've been looking at upside down finally makes sense. But even her tears felt calculated, performed for an audience of one. Me, the mark who'd always fallen for them before. Kevin was sweating through his expensive shirt, probably calculating how much this would cost him, how it would affect his credit score, his image, his carefully constructed facade of success. Jessica just looked hollow, like someone had pulled her plug, and she was running on whatever charge was left. The lawyer slid the papers across the table. The terms were simple. I would forgive the debt entirely. Write it off. The house would be theirs, free and clear. In exchange, they would sign a cease and desist agreement. No contact for 10 years. No calls, no letters, no showing up at my door with emergencies or opportunities or sudden familial feelings. If they violated the agreement, they'd owe $250,000 immediately. No payment plans, no negotiations. Just a $250,000 price tag on try and pull me back into their orbit. Kevin found his voice first. Called it extortion. The lawyer corrected him. Called it contract. Completely legal, completely enforceable. The debt forgiveness alone was worth nearly $500,000. Most people would call that generous. Jessica asked why. Why not just foreclose? Why not take everything? It would have been justified after what they'd done. I told her the truth. I didn't want their house. Didn't want their stuff. Didn't want their problems or their apologies or their promises to do better. I wanted my freedom, and this was the price. Their signatures for my peace. Dad's hand was shaking when he reached for the pen, but he reached for it, didn't hesitate, didn't try to negotiate, just grabbed that pen like it was a life preserver, and he was drowning, which, in a way, he was. Mom signed next. Then Kevin. Jessica went last, and for just a moment, our eyes met. There was something there, maybe regret, maybe recognition, but it wasn't enough. It was years too late and millions of dollars short. As they signed, I felt something lift off my shoulders. Not anger, not satisfaction. Just weight. The invisible weight Sarah's dad had talked about. The weight that builds up mile after mile until you can't carry it anymore. It was gone. The lawyer notarized everything, made copies, handed them their set. Very professional. Very final. They stood to leave, and I stood too. Not to follow, not to say goodbye. Just to watch them go. To see what it looked like when people walked out of your life, because you'd finally given them directions to the exit. At the door, Dad turned back, his mouth open like he wanted to say something profound, something that might fix this. But all that came out was a small, broken tom. Just my name, an acknowledgement that I existed, had always existed, even when they pretended otherwise. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. They left in silence. No dramatic exits, no slamming doors. Just 4 people walking away from a $500,000 gift, like they'd lost something precious, which I suppose they had. They'd lost their safety net, the one they'd never admitted existed, but had always counted on being there. Sarah and I sat in that conference room for another hour, not talking, just existing in the space where my old life had officially ended. The lawyer had champagne, said it was traditional for closing big deals. We toasted to new beginnings, to roads not yet traveled, to the family you choose versus the family you're given. That was a year ago, December 24th, the day I bought my freedom with forgiveness. Sarah and I opened the safe harbor for drivers 6 months later, a place where truckers could get a meal, a shower, a moment of human connection without judgment or cost. Funded by the Tom Callahan Trust, which still had plenty left after buying my family out of my life. We get Christmas cards from other truckers now. Real ones, not the obligatory ones family sends. Mike stops by when his routes bring him through. Says I look younger, like I dropped a lifetime of cargo somewhere back on the interstate. He's not wrong. I drove millions of miles to learn a simple truth. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when you're broken down on the side of the road at 3 a.m. It's about who sees you, not what you can provide. It's about the people who'd share their last cup of coffee with you, not because they have to, but because they want to. I lost the family I was born into, but I built the family I deserved. And every morning, when I wake up next to Sarah, when I see the truckers coming to our doors looking for the same thing I've been looking for all those years, connection, understanding, a place to rest, I know I made the right choice. The lottery ticket gave me money, but signing those papers, that gave me something worth more than all the jackpots in California. It gave me my life back. And that, fellow Redditors, is how I learned that sometimes the biggest win isn't what you gain. It's what you finally have the courage to let go.